Good morning. It's Friday the 13th. Yes, the 13th of September. And this is Govindraj Ethiraj, headquartered in broadcasting as well as streaming from Mumbai, India's financial capital. We don't have a take for today, but we'll return with one on Monday. The top stories and themes for the day. The Bulls tire of pause hit play again. The market zoomed 1,439 points. Inflation comes in at 3.65%, higher than projections for August. The European Central Bank cuts rates again, all eyes on the Federal Reserve now. Will India cut fuel prices? A major European carrier, Ryanair, says airfares will fall. And Jamsetji Tata, the founder of the Tata Group, how he attacked economic problems and social gaps at the same time.
This is the Core Report with Govindraj Ethiraj.
Market zoom in late trading jump. Indian markets rose to fresh records after commodity stocks jumped on expectations that China would cut interest rates on mortgages to boost consumption. Now, cues, as we usually report here, flow from the West, and this was one of those occasions when it flowed from the East and specifically China. So a slowdown in Chinese consumption, thanks to a real estate crisis, has hit commodities ranging from iron ore and steel prices to, of course, oil prices worldwide, as we've been discussing here. Now, any reversal in that is obviously good for commodity prices and companies because prices of these of those commodities could potentially go up. Indices have now gained about 17% each this year and are amongst the best performing globally, Reuters reported, adding the Sensex has crossed the 83,000 mark for the first time, and the Nifty has logged its 55th record high in 2024. The big jump on Thursday came at 2 p.m. or thereabouts, though a little more than an hour before closing bell. Earlier, stocks in Asia-Pacific markets also tracked gains on Wall Street, fueled by a tech rally. Japan's Nikkei 225 jumped about 3.5% to close at 36,833, and the Taiwan weighted index was up about 3% to close at 21,653. The BSE Sensex was up about 1,439 points to close at 82,962. The Nifty 50, on the other hand, was up 470 points at 25,388. Among commodity stocks, Hindalco was up almost 4%. On the Nifty, JSW Steel, Grasim, Tata Steel and Coal India were amongst the other commodity gainers. In the broad markets, the Nifty MidCap index was up 1.2% and the Nifty SmallCap gained 1%. The European Central Bank has cut rates. The European Central Bank, or ECB, has lowered interest rates for the second time in 3 months, with inflation falling back towards 2%. On the other hand, concerns about economic growth now rising. The key deposit rate was cut by 25 basis points to 3.5%, something analysts polled by Bloomberg had predicted. ECB President Christine Lagarde told reporters in Frankfurt that they remained data dependent, and adding that Thursday's decision was unanimous, and this is particularly justified in view of the uncertainty that abounds. A declining path is not predetermined, she added, neither in terms of sequence or in volume. Bloomberg also reported that the ECB is getting more confident that consumer price growth is returning to target following its historic spike. The Eurozone's 20-nation economy, meanwhile, is losing momentum, adding the weakness prompted the ECB to trim its forecasts for gross domestic product, or GDP, in 24, 25 and 26, now seeing expansion this year of 0.8% compared to 0.9% in the last round of projections, according to Bloomberg. Inflation numbers are low. India's inflation numbers have come low as predicted, though they were higher than economists' expectations thanks to a sharp rise in vegetable prices, according to government data released on Thursday evening. Vegetable prices rose about 10.7% year-on-year in August against about 6.8% in the previous month. Now, vegetable price fluctuations in general seem to be something that the government has not been successful in controlling, as it is dependent on a combination of weather and supply chain and, of course, storage factors. So, annual retail inflation was 3.65% in August compared with a revised 3.6% in July. Economists polled by Reuters had forecast August inflation at 3.5%. So that figure now is below the Reserve Bank of India's target of 4% in July and has been reached after a gap of nearly 5 years, says Reuters, largely due to the high base effect. Prices of food, which account for nearly half of retail inflation, rose 5.6, close to 5.7% in August, compared to a 5.4% rise in the previous month. Meanwhile, the growth in the index of industrial production, the numbers that are released at the same time, increased to 4.8% in July from the upward revised figure of 4.7% in the preceding month. Will India cut oil prices? Oil companies will consider reducing fuel prices if the price of crude oil remains low for an extended period, an official at the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas said on Thursday, reported by Business Standard. Oil prices are now near a 3-year low, as we've been reporting, hovering around the $70 a barrel, though a little higher, closer to $72 a barrel, which all makes it more profitable for oil marketing companies like Indian Oil and BPCL. Now, with elections ahead in states like Maharashtra and Haryana, there is an expectation that this could be an opportune time to cut prices at petrol pumps. Petrol prices were decontrolled in 2010 and were made more market determined, and diesel was decontrolled in 2014. Petrol prices largely rule above 100 rupees a litre in most states in India, while diesel is above 90 rupees a litre, and there's not been much change in that in recent years. Meanwhile, the International Energy Agency, or IEA, has said that global oil demand will rise less than previously thought this year, led by that weakness in China, according to Reuters. World demand will rise by about 900,000 barrels per day, the advisor to industrialized countries said in that monthly report, down 70,000 barrels per day, or 7.2% from its previous forecast. There is a difference in 2024 demand growth forecast between what the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries is saying versus the International Energy Agency, though the OPEC has also cut its 2024 forecast. The IEA said that with the steam seemingly running out of Chinese oil demand growth and only modest increases or declines in most other countries, current trends reinforce their expectation that global demand will plateau by the end of this decade. China has for years driven global rises in oil consumption. Now, here's the interesting part. The IEA is saying that slower Chinese economic growth is only one part of the problem. The second is the shift towards electric vehicles, which have changed the paradigm for the country. Now that other economies are doing better, gasoline use in the United States, which is the largest consumer, has dropped year on year in 5 of the first 6 months of this year. The IEA said that outside of China, oil demand growth is tepid at best. Healthcare for those above 70 years. The government has announced that it is expanding a program to provide citizens aged 70 and above with annual medical insurance coverage of 500,000 rupees or 5 lakh rupees per family. The new plan is expected to benefit an additional 60 million people, according to the Prime Minister's 2018 healthcare initiative, which already covers more than 500 million citizens, the government said. Now, this program is considered the world's largest healthcare program and offers free treatment for serious illnesses, already providing poor families with an annual cover of 500,000 rupees, Reuters reported. Ryanair projects lower fares. While airfares in Asia and India are steady to higher, depending on what time of the year, including, of course, outbound, particularly to the west where fares are strong, demand is slowing in Europe. Ryanair, which has a fleet of 594 aircraft, flies to 250 airports in 37 countries, mostly in Europe, has said that ticket prices could fall as much as 10% from the year-ago period, according to Bloomberg. The Irish carrier previously said it expected prices to be 5% lower this winter, but CEO Michael O'Leary said on Thursday that the drop in the July-September period could go up to as much as 10%. Consumer spending remains constrained after travel rebounded following the pandemic. The airline, that's Ryanair, cut its outlook in July for ticket prices during summer, saying fares would be materially lower as consumers grew more cautious, said Bloomberg. A Jamsetji Tata story. Jamsetji Tata, founder of the Tata Group, was born in 1839 and died in 1904. Along the way, he pretty much pioneered modern Indian industry, from Empress Mills to Tata Steel and what is now Indian Hotels Company or the Taj Group of hotels. He built it all. A new book by Harish Bhat and R. Gopalakrishnan focuses on the entrepreneurial principles of Jamsetji Tata rather than the man himself, given that there are several authoritative biographies on him. Bhat is former chairman of Tata Coffee and former CEO of Tata Consumer Products and sits on the board of several Tata companies right now. And R. Gopalakrishnan was on the board of Tata Sons for 17 years until 2015 and worked with Unilever before that. Both authors are obviously Tata Group veterans. What interested me about the book and Jamsetji Tata was his interesting approach to solve and attack both business and social problems simultaneously and seeing them as interconnected rather than separate. I caught up with Harish Bhat in a somewhat longish conversation, but then this is a Friday, so happy listening. Harish, thank you so much for joining me. So, we're speaking today in the context of your new book, co-authored with R. Gopalakrishnan, called Jamsetji Tata, Powerful Learnings for Corporate Success. So, you've taken care to preface this by saying that this is not a biography, but it's actually about distilling learnings from Jamsetji Tata, from his time, and then the principles that he set forth, which have obviously sustained the institution of the Tatas for all these decades. So let me start with a question about Jamsetji Tata and whether or not we could today see similar entrepreneurs, visionaries, founders, businessmen. And let me build on that a little more before handing over. So, as I could see at his time, someone like Jamsetji Tata was always trying to solve many problems at the same time. He was spotting economic opportunities, but he was also trying to see the social gaps and trying to address both at the same time, which obviously became the bedrock of the Tata Group in general. But simultaneously, he was trying to, let's say, build an institute of science. He was trying to build a steel plant, solve an electricity problem, use hydroelectricity, which turns out to be more sustainable, and all of that at the same time thinking about the people, the contribution to society, and the values that would go forth. This sort of multi-layered entrepreneurial personality, would we see someone like that today? Or to put it in one sentence, could a Jamsetji Tata exist today?
So when Mr. Gopalakrishnan and I wrote this book, Jamsetji Tata, Powerful Learnings for Corporate Success, you're quite right. This is not a biography. We have distilled what the principles of Jamsetji Tata were, what were his core ideas. And we have actually come to the conclusion that they're very, very relevant to today's entrepreneurs, today's businessmen, today's leaders. So the categorical answer to your question is yes, a Jamsetji Tata could exist today because the ideas that fueled Jamsetji Tata were very simple and very powerful. At the core, Govind, the idea which powered him was that the community should be center stage in an enterprise and not just another stakeholder. He was a very astute businessman. The very first greenfield industry that he founded, Empress Mills, was one of the most profitable companies of its kind in India. It was a textile mill based out of Nagpur. But it was also the mill where he implemented for the first time ever in India the concept of accident insurance, the concept of gratuitous pension for workers, the concept of a provident fund. And people went and asked him, Mr. Tata, why are you doing this? And in 1895, he delivered a speech where he said, we founded this institution on very straightforward business principles. Our wealth belongs to our shareholders, but we believe that the prosperity, the welfare of our workers is the surest foundation for our prosperity of tomorrow. And to him, in his mind, workers, the workforce, the community, in his mind, transformed to the nation. And after that, the core principle that he pursued was to do what was good for the nation. He was, of course, a very astute businessman. He saw the areas that had business opportunity, but he also identified the areas which were extremely important for India and for the nation, which is why he went into steel, because he thought domestic steel was very important for the future of India, which is why he went to clean hydroelectric energy, because he thought that was essential for the city of Bombay, which used to run completely on coal at that time, or which is why he wanted an institution of higher education in science, which resulted in the Indian Institute of Science coming up. So while you see him doing multiple things in his life and pursuing multiple streams, the origin of that, or the Gangotri, or the origin of that river, was actually his love for the country and his love for India. And that's what we have tried to express in this book. So an entrepreneur of today who spots very good business opportunity in a space that he creates or in a space where he taps into potential demand, but at the same time is doing things for the love of the country, for the good of the country and the community, I think there is every opportunity for yet another Jamsetji Tata to be born in this country, for many, many entrepreneurs like him to flower out in India. We do hope that this book, Govind, will be read by many aspiring potential entrepreneurs and even current entrepreneurs, and they will adapt some of these principles to their own lives and companies.
The other example that struck me was the Tata Silk Farm, the silk, what became then subsequently the Mysore Silk and the Central Silk Board, which followed. Silk is something that is completely off the beaten path, even at that time. And I'm sure even I won't be surprised if it's the case today too. What is the thinking that, if you've been able to, let's say, pick his brains in retrospect, how does that, come into your radar that, that you pick something like this?
This amazed me, Govind. I stay in Basavangudi in Bangalore, and the Tata Silk Farm is just next to my
It's right next to you.
There's just next to my house. There's a bus stop there called the Tata Silk Farm, and I was wondering, why is this called the Tata Silk Farm? And then I researched the story. What actually happened was Jamsetji Tata visited Japan in 1893, and there he saw, you know, Japanese silk farms and Japanese mastery over the art of silk. And he said, why can't we bring back a thriving silk industry to India? When he returned to India, he decided to establish this in the state of Mysore, where a silk industry had flourished in the distant. He knew the Diwan of Mysore, who was open generally to such progressive ventures. And then he selected Bangalore as the place because the temperate climate of Bangalore lent itself to the cultivation of silk. It was the start. He used it as a startup capital at that time. It continues to be one today. But the reason he did this, Govind, which became very clear, is that he wanted to create employment for local people and for Indians. And he wanted India on the world map of silk. He actually writes to the Inspector General of Agriculture on the 16th of April, 1903, saying, I have always in my limited sphere endeavored to keep to this aim of training the native talent, and I'm always prepared to offer all the help and facility to those who so deserve it. He actually got a Japanese couple to come down and stay in Bangalore and train people here, train the locals here on the cultivation, the rearing of the silkworm, the treatment of any diseases, eventual post-cultivation and packaging for European markets. So he did a lot here. And, some of the giants of Indian sericulture, like Appadure Mudaliar and Lakshman Rao, were amongst the first trainees of the Tata Silk Farm. So the core purpose was to create employment for Indians, skilling Indians, generating sustained employment for them, and creating an industry that India could be very, very proud of. It's a unique story. And I hope a few people listening to this podcast will decide to read further about this story.
So, in your book, you've talked about persistence, which you've already touched upon, and then there are principles, profits, and perspectives. So, tell us about where maybe he saw, and I'm talking about Jamsetji Tata, not so much his successors, maybe, a conflict, or let's say maybe a mental an inner conflict between, let's say, am I compromising between principles and profits here? And therefore, then what did he do?
So let me take Empress Mills, which was his first enterprise. So he rapidly made it the most profitable enterprise of its kind in the country. How did he do that? He used the best quality of cotton, long stapled cotton. He used manufacturing innovations like the ring spindle, which were not even being used in the UK at that time, and that led to enhanced productivity within the mills. And he made it the most profitable enterprise of its kind. Very clearly, for him, there was a potential conflict between the making of profits and the utilization of those profits. He resolved that conflict in his mind by ensuring that a good part of those profit went towards the welfare of the workers. So, in this book, there is a reference to JRD Tata being asked, is the Tata Group capitalist or is socialist? And he says it's a bit of both, or I don't know. Jamsetji Tata actually resolved that potential conflict in his mind by saying, it is the purpose of an organization to be very profitable, but it is also the purpose of that organization to use part of those profits to contribute back to the workers and the community. So that classic debate between what is capitalist and what is socialist, that is the way it got resolved in his mind. And later, as you know, his sons donated their wealth, which was the equity shares of Tata Sons, to the Tata Charitable Trust, which is why until today, 66% of the shareholding of Tata Sons is held by the Tata Charitable Trust, which kind of hardwires the community into the center of the Tata Group.
So now, if I were to fast forward and look at, let's say, the more recent forays of the Tata Group, what are the original principles you feel most reflect some of these forays or ventures, including acquisitions and the way they're rolling out or the way they're playing out?
A very, very interesting question, Govind. And as a business historian, I have studied that. Let's take some of the most recent ventures. Let me take, for instance, the semiconductors venture, which has been announced by the Tata Group very recently, over the last year or two. It's very clear to me that semiconductors is an industry which India needs for the future. Virtually everything that you and I use uses semiconductors, from our electronics to our cars to our washing machines to our air conditioners. It's an area which is of very high importance to the country. And therefore, the Tata Group's entry into this area, and it's also a big business opportunity for the future, given the shifting supply chains across the world and so forth. So, once again, here is a venture which keeps the country at its core and what is required for the future of the country at its core, but at the same time is a very big business opportunity. In many ways, it's reflective of the kind of work that Jamsetji Tata did with steel. Big business opportunity, but also core and required for the country for the future. So if you look at some of the recent ventures of the group as well, I think those same principles of Jamsetji Tata reflected in what the group today, under the leadership of Mr. Chandrasekharan, is undertaking for the future.
So you're saying, if I were to recap that, the biggest opportunities for entrepreneurs in India still lie in India, as in looking at India as the market and India as the core opportunity, and then, of course, onwards.
I would like to rephrase that as saying that as entrepreneurs, I think all entrepreneurs want to create profitable businesses, meet consumer needs, and become financially very successful. But I think that cannot be the core purpose of an organization, Govind. I think having a larger purpose, which is dedicated to the community and the nation, actually fuels you, actually gives you a lot of energy, which you cannot get just by the drive towards making more profits. So the point I'm reflecting here is that every entrepreneur in India today has an opportunity to contribute to the nation through the industry or through the enterprise that she or he is building up within the country. I think that is something that we try to put forward through this book. That purpose drove Jamsetji Tata. That purpose has driven his successors over 156 years of the Tata Group. And that purpose can drive tens of thousands of entrepreneurs in the country today and tomorrow.
Right. And one of the points that you've prefaced, or in the prelude to your main book, you've talked about, how do virtuous practices survive, and at what point perhaps do they not? So, and you're really saying here that if you were to look at international examples as well, there are certain virtuous principles that, that ensure that an organization sustains over time. And when we say over time, I think in this case, it's 6 generations.
So, yes, Govind, it's very important for a virtuous philosophy to sustain over generations. And one of the things we have examined in this book is, how does that virtuous philosophy survive? And what we say here is that, firstly, that philosophy should be well known across the company or the group. The philosophy of Jamsetji Tata is very well known within the Tata Group, very well known to leaders and to employees of the Tata Group. That's the first point we make. The second point we make is, it cannot just remain at the philosophy level. You have icons of the group over the years, and you have icons within the Tata Group like Suman Mulgaonkar, Darbari Seth, Nani Palkiwala, Rusi Bodhi, FC Kohli. These leaders, along with the likes of Jamsetji Tata, Dorabji Tata, JRD Tata, are venerated. Their accomplishments are annually remembered at the companies that they led. So it's very important to have those icons who have actually implemented that philosophy over the generations, for them to be remembered and venerated, so that we keep their philosophy alive. The third, Govind, which is very important if you have to keep philosophy alive over the years, is to actually, have narratives around that philosophy, have enough virtuous storytelling around it, so that those narratives are very, very easily understandable across the length and breadth of the organization by all the stakeholders. Which is why there is a lot of storytelling around what Jamsetji Tata did, around what JRD Tata did, and so forth, because the stories remain in our mind. They're very powerful markers of the philosophy. And finally, Govind, we refer to rituals. Rituals like within the Tata Group, we celebrate Founders' Day on the 3rd of March every year. We celebrate the JRD Tata's birthday on the 29th of July, and it's the day for business excellence within the Tata Group. There are, rituals like you referred to the Tata Management Training Center. Most participants at the TMTC also get a guided tour of the Tata Central Archives, which is next to it. Within Bombay House, which is our group headquarters, there's the Tata Experience Center, where many, many people visit the Tata Experience Center to get a very good and very digital glimpse of the history and narratives of the group. So these are all the rituals. So we actually talk in the book about 4 things: philosophy, icons, narratives, and rituals, all of which help to perpetuate the philosophy from generation to generation.
Right. Last question, Harish. So you've been in the group for 4 decades. And you've also led many companies within the group, including Tata Tea, what became Tata Global Beverages, among others. What's the one thing that resonates with you the most in all his Jamsetji Tata's principles?
So I think there's one thing that resonates most with me, Govind, that's integrity. I think it's being true to yourself, being true to your beliefs, doing business with integrity, which Jamsetji Tata propounded right from the time he established his first greenfield enterprise. Integrity is the bedrock on which the Tata Group is founded, and integrity is the reason why the Tata brand commands so much trust across the length and breadth of our country today. I think he's left that behind with us as a very, very powerful principle to follow in our lives. And I'm personally very grateful to the Tata Group. I've been working with the group for 37 years now, and not once has the group asked me to do anything which has been against my conscience over these 37 years, which enables me to sleep well at night, which you will agree with me is worth its weight in gold.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Govind. And I hope many, many of your listeners decide to pick up this book, Jamsetji Tata, Powerful Learnings for Corporate Success. And I hope they enjoy reading this book. Thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you so much. And before we go, here's a quick reminder. We are ranking 24 worldwide. So in the top 25 in the best business news podcast. And this is chosen from millions of podcasts on Good Pods and ranked by listens, ratings, comments, subscriptions, and shares. So it's a huge thank you from all of us at the Core Report. Keep listening and do keep sending us your feedback. That was the Core Report with me, Govindraj Ethiraj. Do stay connected with more of our coverage at the Core. You can check out our website or sign up to our newsletter for our exclusive stories, one in-depth feature a day on www.thecore.in. Do also track us on LinkedIn, where we usually post synopses or extracts of our top stories and interviews. We would love your feedback on how we can make business more interesting and relevant, including, of course, India's vibrant manufacturing sector. So write to us at feedback@thecore.in. And thank you once again for listening.